Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by OMIIA, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barnard. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Ketul Patel. Ketul is the president of OMIIA Consulting, where he leverages his 30-plus years in supply chain to help companies balance strategic intent and operational execution in pursuit of sustainable business success. Ketul is also the author of a newly released book, A Journey of Elevation, Lessons for Business Transformation from Everest Base Camp, which is something we're going to hear more about today. So, Ketul, thank you so much for being with us today here on the Sourcing Hero podcast.
Thank you, Kelly. Truly appreciate the opportunity here to share my experience with the audience here.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of that experience, I shared a little bit about your professional and personal pursuits in my intro. But what else do you think it's helpful or interesting for people to know about your journey to this point?
Oh, thank you. I think you shared quite well in terms of what I do today. I have led, right, as part of my journey, I've led complex supply chain and business transformation as a corporate executive and as a Big Four consultant over my 30-year career, working across retail, wholesale, and manufacturing environments. And over the years, this kind of a rounded experience positioned me well to connect the dots and provide that strategic thinking and prepare and lead organizations through transformative change and instill that execution discipline, and most importantly, bring that urgency. So today I serve as a business turnaround specialist and a fractional COO for mid-market companies looking to improve profitability and scale with Fortune 500 level rigor.
Now, given that professional focus, I have to ask, how did you end up climbing Mount Everest?
I know, as I shared in my book, we started discussing, a group of friends, that we used to hike together here, and started discussing about the journey, amongst a larger group of friends. So we always kind of, thought of kind of going out and, making more of the idea started out with that, hey, why don't we explore just the Himalayas? Nothing for, this level of journey there, but we'll do kind of more of leisurely hiking there and go make a day trip and come back to, the hotel or wherever we are. And that's how it all started. But then when kind of a smaller group of avid hikers emerged from the initial RSVPs, someone popped an idea as to, how about we explore all the way to Everest Base Camp? And that's when it was introduced. So initially it was about, are you crazy? And even
that's exactly what I would have said if I'd been there.
Yes, bringing that up. But then I think, each of us kind of started to, and we all came from very professional backgrounds, right? Engineers and entrepreneurs and accountants and technologists and others in the group there. And so we said, okay, you know what, let's explore this. Let's follow that methodical process of exploring our option and with the due diligence that's needed, right? So we started to circulate different YouTube video links that people would find, and we started to talk to people who had been there and what would it take to be there. And then also had our meetings with our physicians to, at that point, because, most of us were, closing in or over 50. And we were like, can our bodies kind of take this as well? And so we recognize that there's a lot of preparation and everything that needs to be done. But, it was really aligning kind of, the why part, as I talk about as well in the book, as to why would we even want to take this on, right? Let's just go have fun and, And I think that's where once each of us figured out the why for each one of us individually, I think, and then the last part, I think that when we talked to this tour guide over there in Nepal, and he explained us kind of, the whole day-to-day rigor and everything. And then that's when we felt that, that kind of build that confidence that I think this is something we can do it. And right, obviously there will be a lot of preparation and everything that will be required. But I think that's when we ended up thinking that, you know what, hey, let's go climb Everest Base Camp.
Now, I'm interested to know, you've talked a little bit about the preparation, the checking, the education, the thinking, but then also, of course, there's the excursion itself. At what point in that whole journey did you start to realize that there were some connections between the prep and the effort required? And then what businesses go through when they embark on a supply chain transformation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Initially, as I was going through, right, the journey, it was, my mind was just absorbing things. There was so much to absorb there on a daily basis, right? And adjusting and enjoying kind of the new out of the world experience that, I was going through and literally, as I write, taking a breath at a time and a step at a time, right? Because it's so awesome environment around you. It's mesmerizing, spiritual, challenging, all the experiences, emotions that come to bear within those 12 days. And so it was difficult at that point. It was literally taking a day at a time. And so it was not until after the journey, I believe, on my way back to the US, I'd taken a stop at India midway, and you talk to people at that point that, yes, but you don't really comprehend until you have a peaceful moment to really reflect on what just happened.
Yeah.
And what did my body go through? What did my mind go through? And that's when, I started to realize that let me capture these moments. And at that point, I didn't know whether, I was thinking maybe I should share this for the people who are thinking of taking this on. So I started to put down my thoughts around what the key moments were on each of those days, and thought that maybe I'll write an article or a blog or something to share. And so, however, as the notes started to grow, I started to think, the parallels between the mountain and the organizations and that I've led or advised through transformations over the past 3 decades. And both journeys, I realized, tested your endurance, your patience, and your belief in the mission. And both reveal that the progress rarely happens in a straight line, right? There are acclimatization days, there are setbacks, there are moments when you have to slow down to move forward. And that is when I realized that there's so much to tell, not just about the 12 days, but also 30 plus years. And I wanted to capture those lessons in a way that speaks to both the hikers and business leaders, anyone facing a challenge that seems larger than themselves, right? So it could not just be a story of adventure, but a framework for resilience, whether it be professionally, personally, or spiritually. And that is where I started to believe that this could easily turn into a book if I can see it through.
Now, one of the things that you offer up in your book that I really appreciate, and I thought it was a very thoughtful comment to make, was that general business transformation is not the same thing as supply chains operations transformation. From your perspective, why is it important to distinguish those two efforts?
Thanks for that observation there, Kelly. Historically, I believe supply chain transformation, was viewed as an operational enabler, right? So it focused on strengthening the core functions, right? That the SCORE functions of plan, source, make, deliver, and returns functions, to support businesses through efficiency, cost, and service improvements. And what has changed over the last several years is the role that supply chains play now. They're no longer just enabling the business; they're actively driving growth. We enable supply chain, gives companies the confidence to expand into markets, or launch new customer channels, or introduce new products, or pursue M&A activities, or completely redesign their commercial growth strategy altogether. And that's where I believe the distinction lies. And that business transformation is about redefining what a company does and where it competes. Whereas supply chain transformation is about redefining how the company can reliably and profitably execute that ambition, right? So in that sense, supply chain, I would say, is a critical subset of a business transformation. But increasingly, right, it is also has become the foundation, I believe, that makes bold business transformation possible. And more as I deal with kind of the mid-sized businesses, for them it's really around the business, and then supply chain is a component, although it may have been triggered by supply chain, but they look at changing that as a truly how to change their businesses around that transformation as well.
Now, I'm also interested to know, when you talk about the changing role of supply chain in operational health, financial health, its role in growth, how well do you think most leadership teams understand the operational day-to-day reality of what happens in their company's supply chain?
I believe most C-suites understand the intent of their supply chain, right? And now, especially with leadership positions being created right in the boards, and supply chain leaders have a seat at the board now, right? But not always. They don't always recognize the operational reality, I believe, and that gap has widened significantly over the last few years, when we have become, we have gotten into a constant crisis mode. And so supply chains were pushed to the forefront, if you go back almost overnight during the pandemic.
Yes.
And it accelerated further by the explosive growth of e-commerce, right? I recall working with companies just a couple of years prior, building roadmaps to prepare for e-commerce growth projected for 2025. And thinking that gradually, right, we are going to get there. And then when the pandemic hit, those 5 to 7 year strategies were compressed into 12 months, right? All the organizations went through a stress test. And that rapid acceleration fundamentally upended the traditional relationships between manufacturers, distributors, retailers, and that exposed the fragility, right? That was not visible on executive dashboards. So, and after that, as many organizations began to stabilize and invest in resilience and new forces like geopolitical disruption, rapid advancements started to kind of take shape, and that pushed supply chains into near constant crisis. And so where I see is that it has evolved into the plan C thinking, which is something I talk about in my book as well, right? That it reflects the reality that leaders are often operating beyond the original plan or the obvious contingency planning that have been done, right? And so in practice, when you start looking at plan C, that meant making real-time trade-offs with incomplete information.
Yeah.
And how do you choose the least disruptive path forward, or adjusting pace and expectations? How you redistribute your effort, and aligning teams around what success looks like or meant now under new constraints, right? So it required that decisiveness without false confidence, and flexibility without panic. And so the mountain reinforced this lesson for me. And in moments of true uncertainty, resilience does not come from having more plans, right? It comes from teams that can recalibrate quickly, trust one another, and keep moving forward when the map no longer matches the terrain, honestly. And the same is true for supply chains today. And if C-suites that understand this reality will lead with far greater effectiveness and clarity for the organization, I believe.
Now, it's interesting that you talk about you just having more plans is not necessarily the way to succeed, because you shared a couple of statistics in the book that call out some of the concerns around the likelihood of transformations being successful. So, for instance, you cite Gartner as saying that 70% of all transformations fail, and Bain & Company says that 88% fail to achieve their original objectives. What do you think are the causes of these very high failure rates?
Yeah, those statistics are alarming, right?
They are.
But they're not surprising. In my experience, transformation failure is rarely about flawed strategy or insufficient technology. And especially in this day and age where there's so much data and so much information that's available and at your disposal. But it is always about how change is led and absorbed by the organization, right? And some of the primary causes, I could think of, and something also that has been talked about more and more as well, is kind of overestimating this alignment and underestimating the adoption part, right? Where many transformations are declared, aligned once leadership signs on the dotted line and agrees on the strategy. But in reality, the alignment at the top does not translate into understanding or commitment at the middle level and at frontline levels, honestly. And that's because that's where the execution actually happens, right? And they decide how much can they sustain. And without their sustained engagement, clarity, and ownership, that's when even well-designed transformations or planned transformations stall. And another thing comes to mind is just not treating transformation as a project, right? But truly a capability shift. And so even though there may have been a concerted scope and objectives defined around transformation with timelines, milestones, deliverables, and resources assigned to it, it fails, but it fails to change your behavior, the decision rights, the incentives, right? Or even the operating rhythm, right? That is required. And so when the program ends, the organization simply reverts to old habits, right? Goes back to their whatever spreadsheet days or whatever, making the transformation more superficial and short-lived. And so another thing is around, pushing harder instead of adapting, right? And that's where when resistance or volatility appears, leaders often respond by adding pressure, more targets, more initiatives, more communication, but the real progress requires that plan C thinking, right? Recalibrating goals and pacing change. And then lastly, I think the most important one is ignoring kind of the human cost of continuous change, right? Which is not often doesn't show up in metrics or dashboards, which is kind of the fatigue, the fear, the loss of trust that is experienced. And when leaders focus on outputs without neglecting that morale and capability building, I think that's where you see, the challenges emerge.
Now, with those statistics, I was curious. I needed a point of comparison. So I did a really quick search, and I found that about 2/3 of the people who start the journey to get to Everest Base Camp actually make it there. So you actually have the opposite. So for instance, Gartner is saying that 70% of all transformations fail, but these data points that I found say that 70% of all climbers who start the journey actually make it there. So you've got sort of an inverse. Does this mean that it's easier to climb to Everest Base Camp than it is to successfully complete a business transformation?
That's a great question. And the short answer is no. Everest or Everest Base Camp isn't easier than transformation, but I see that the comparison is quite revealing, right? The obvious reason is that when you are trekking up to the Everest Base Camp or even the summit, right, it's a life and death situation, literally, right up in the thin air environment. But in practicality, on Everest, success rates look higher because I believe that the challenge is so explicit, it's bounded and it's well respected.
Yeah.
And climbers know exactly what they are attempting. They train for months or years, choose experienced guides, they're Sherpas, acclimatize deliberately, take a pause at every point when they're going into the next level of terrain. And most importantly, accept that turning back is not a failure. I think that was the biggest thing that we were advised even when we were starting out, that don't let your ego get in your way. So wherever you are, right, at whatever point. And the mountain enforces that humility, the discipline and adaptation. So when conditions change, plans change. And so business transformations fail more often because organizations do the opposite. And they underestimate the climb, overestimate their readiness, and believe commitment alone will carry them through, right? As long as you are committed, and leaders announce bold objectives, but then we don't calibrate incentives, decision rights, behaviors, things that I talked about. And so, and unlike a mountain, organizations allow ego, politics, sunk cost thinking to override signals that are so obvious and that something isn't working. And so there's that important distinction, right? That on Everest, everyone agrees on what success looks like, and the environment dictates the pace. Whereas in transformation, you often see success as ambiguous, timelines, maybe artificial.
Yeah.
And in spite of that, leaders will keep on pushing, when the organization is oxygen deprived. So if anything, I think the data suggests this, that climbing Everest isn't easier, right? It's more honestly approached. Let me put it that way, right? That and because mountain doesn't negotiate, with ambition, and transformation does, and that's where leaders get into trouble.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. You talk about respecting the challenge. I think if more of us had a better understanding of what transformation is going to require, maybe even right up to and including consulting with our doctors to make sure we're healthy enough to attempt business transformation, maybe we would have different success rates. Ketul, one of the things that you talked about a moment ago, and I want to sort of pull out a piece of advice for you. I'll let you consider whether this comes from your perspective in transformation in business or whether it's from the climb. When you reach one of those points where you're really starting to think, should I stop and turn back? What is your advice about what people should focus on in that moment? Not necessarily to keep going, not necessarily to turn back, but to make the right decision for them in the moment.
Oh, that comparison is very real. Just like transformation, our journey began with are we crazy moment to genuine excitement.
Yeah.
And after the preparation and all that, right, that we went through, confidence replaced, the anxiety that we had. But I remember, as we went through, as I write in the book, one of our first full day of hiking, it turned out to be, which was October 11th. And it was so physically demanding day of our entire journey, physically and mentally, because it turned out to be a 13-hour hike.
Wow.
Or trek that we went through, passed through mudslide, a recent mudslide, rain and with flashlights in total darkness. And I think, that was the moment that we thought of alternatives, not to kind of back out, but is there another shorter way to go up there or something, but I think then what prevailed was really the teamwork at that time, right? And what helped us power through was really then the combination of focus, teamwork, trust, and humility, right? So we allowed the team members to vet out, right? Everyone had so many different people were frustrated, were, angry, were, demotivated at that point, that if this is our first day of full hike, we still got another 10, 11 days to go. How are we going to go through this, every day? But I think all of that came out, and then logically it evolved. We even explored option that, hey, can we fly further up, and bypass, one of the towns or whatever that we need to go through. But then really talking with the Sherpas and the trust that we had placed in them, talking through everything, it it brought us back to reality.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where it's really the broader lesson that we had was, right, that, and directly applied to transformation, and that individuals and teams move through doubt by anchoring to purpose, right? And then trusting preparation and relying on experienced guides, whether they are Sherpas, on a mountain, or subject matter experts inside or outside an organization who have been there, done that. They know what that path may look like ahead. And then also educating us that if you took the other routes that you're exploring, this is what's going to, these are the hurdles you'll come across later on. And so I think progress under uncertainty is again, not about having all the answers, right? It is about trusting the right people, aligning on the next step, and then moving forward together, when uncertainty disappears. And I think that is what I would certainly, strongly kind of advocate, right? Teams who feel that, okay, now we are at a dead end, right? Or is this something that we can continue on?
Now, one more question for you, and this is actually a tradition here at the Sourcing Hero podcast. We ask this of everyone. So, Ketul, I'm going to give you two questions. You can pick either one, and there are no wrong answers. But the question is either, what does the idea of a sourcing hero mean to you? Or if you want to go a little bit broader, what do you think heroism looks like in a business context?
Well, to me, a sourcing hero, and heroism in a business context, right, in a more broadly, is not about, being heroic with grand gestures or, individual brilliance, right? I believe it's about quiet accountability in moments that matter, and I call it kind of the Sherpa principle. A sourcing hero is someone who consistently makes thoughtful, value-based decisions under pressure, is the person who challenges a supply relationship, when risk is rising, or who surfaces uncomfortable truths early, or who balances, cost with resilience, and also who chooses long-term integrity over short-term wins. And that kind of heroism rarely shows up in headlines or dashboards, but it often determines when an organization weathers disruption or compounds it, right? And so in business, that true heroism always shows up as a judgment, I believe. Mm-hmm. And it's knowing when to follow the process and when to step outside of it, because reality has changed, right? So it's taking ownership of trade-offs, standing by those difficult decisions, and protecting the enterprise, even when the right answer is not the easiest one or most popular one. So much like the mountain, right? The real heroes are not the loudest or the fastest, and they're like the Sherpas, as I call it, right? Who provides that quiet strength, stay grounded, look out for the team, and keep the mission moving forward responsibility, right? So in sourcing or supply chain, I think that everyday heroism is rooted in discipline, courage, and care, and is what builds trust and resilience over time.
And if that answer doesn't make people want to read your book, they must have been listening with the volume too low, because I think that's an excellent perspective to sort of transition people over. I want to remind everybody to look up, the book's title is A Journey of Elevation, Lessons for Business Transformation from Everest Base Camp by Ketul Patel. Ketul, if people are listening into this conversation and they would like to connect with you, they would like to maybe learn more about the book, what is the best place for them to go?
In order to connect with me, certainly ping me on LinkedIn or just tag me there. And also you can visit my website at OMIIAconsulting.com/books. And that will give you enough information to understand about the book, as well as, a few podcasts or articles or anything you may be interested in discovering there.
Awesome.
Thank you, Kelly.
Ketul, and thank you for being here to share your story and your experiences. There is so much that transfers from your literal mountain journey to the journey of supply chain transformation that so many of us are on. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you again, Kelly. And it was a pleasure, and truly enjoyed the conversation here.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well, and always remember that you can be a hero too.